Granny, it's so boring, said Ben. It was a cold Friday evening in November, and usually he was slumped in the back of his mum's and dad's car. Once again, he was on his way to stay the night at his dreaded Granny's house.
Alfie hated going to the dentist. As a result, the boy's teeth were almost all yellow. The ones that weren't yellow were brown. They bore the stains of all the goodies that children love, but dentists hate. Sweets, fizzy drinks, and chocolate.
I'm going shopping in the village, George's mother said to George on Saturday morning, so be a good boy and don't get into any trouble. This was a silly thing to say to a small boy at any age. It immediately made him wonder what sort of mischief he might get into. And don't forget to give Grandma her medicine at 11 o'clock, the mother said. Then out she went, closing the back door behind her. Grandma, who was dozing in her chair by the window, opened one wicked little eye and said, "Now you've heard what your mother said, George. Don't forget my medicine." "No, Grandma," said George. "And just try to behave yourself for once while she's away." "Yes, Grandma," said George. George was bored to tears. He didn't have a brother or a sister. His father was a farmer, and the farm they lived on was miles away from anywhere, so there were never any children to play with. He was tired of staring at pigs and hens and cows and sheep. He was especially tired of having to live in the same house as that grisly old grunion of a grandma. Looking after her all by himself was hardly the most exciting way to spend your Saturday morning.
A man appeared on the corner the cat had been watching. Appeared so suddenly and silently you'd have thought he'd just popped out of the ground. The cat's tail twitched and its eyes narrowed. Nothing like this man had ever been seen on Privet Drive. He was tall, thin, and very old, judging by the silver of his hair and beard, which were both long enough to be tucked into his belt. He was wearing long robes, a purple cloak that swept the ground, and high-heeled buckled boots. His blue eyes were light, bright, and sparkling behind half-moon spectacles, and his nose was very long and crooked, as though it had been broken at least twice. This man's name was Albus Dumbledore.
It was a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 a.m, the rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out.
Before us loomed, to what my eyes seemed, the carcass of a palace, a place of echoes and shadows. "Daniel, you mustn't tell anyone what you're about to see, not even your friend Thomas, no one." A smallish man with Voltairine features framed by thick grey hair opened the door. His impenetrable aquiline gaze rested on mine. "Good morning, Isaac. This is my son Daniel," my father announced. "He'll be 11 soon, and one day the shop will be his. It's time he knew this place." The man called Isaac nodded and invited us in. A blue-tinted gloom obscured the sinuous contours of the marble staircase, and a gallery of frescoes peoples with angels and fabulous creatures. We followed our host through the palatial corridor and arrived at a sprawling round hall where a spiralling basilica of shadows was pierced by shafts of light from a high glass dome above us. A labyrinth of passageways and crammed bookshelves rose from a base to a pinnacle like a beehive woven with tunnels, steps, platforms and bridges that preceded an immense library of seemingly impossible geometry. I looked at my father, stunned. He smiled at me and winked. "Welcome to the cemetery of forgotten books, Daniel." Scattered among the library's corridors and platforms, I could make out about a dozen human figures. Some of them turned to greet me from afar, and I recognised the faces of various colleagues of my father's fellows of Second-Hand Booksellers' Guild. To my 10-year-old eyes, they looked like a brotherhood of alchemists in furtive study. My father knelt next to me and with his eyes fixed on mine addressed me in the hushed voice he reserved for promises and secrets. "This is a place of mystery, Daniel. A sanctuary. Every book, every volume you see here has a soul. The soul of the person who wrote it and of those who read it and lived it and dreamed with it. Every time a book changes hands, every time someone runs his eyes down its page, its spirit grows and strengthens.